Hello and welcome to another edition of Shaka Extra Time. I am Paul Ndiho. Joining me on set is Shaka Sali himself, aka the Kabale Kid. Hello, Shaka.
Hello, Paul.
How are you?
Hugely terrific. And how is it like to celebrate for almost as long as I have been in America? When I last checked, I found out what your age is, and I am not really going to be in a situation where I'm going to tell everybody in the world how old you are, but I can only say you are as old as I have been living here in the United States of America.
Well, let's put the record straight. I just turned 42 years old. That's a remarkable achievement, you'd say, right?
Very interesting.
Interesting. A warm welcome to you. All our Facebook followers are watching us live. Shaka Extra Time is a place where you get to talk to Shaka himself. And today we'll be talking about political transitions in Africa. Maybe let's begin by getting putting political transitions in context. Shaka, let's start maybe by you telling us what is a political transition.
Political transition, of course, comes in many different, forms, shapes, and what have you. But frankly, what every society would hope for, I think, is what you would call a peaceful, smooth transition of power from one individual to another individual, so that life keeps to go on, my friend. Life goes on and people continue to do their things, and in some cases, even in fact, do much better than the generation that came before them.
Let's talk about what we saw happen in Congo. Everybody was talking about how this is practically impossible in Congo. But surprisingly, President Kabila surprised every single one of his critics and actually did what people thought was impossible.
Well, first of all, I think that he did a very good job in the sense that, at least for now, it looks like a smooth transition from one individual to another individual, Felix Tshisekedi. The question is, does Felix when you look at Tshisekedi in the manner in which he comes into office, does he have, for example, the authority to control the institutions so that he can actually embark on the business of governing? Because sometimes you have a president or you have an individual who assumes office, has a title, has a rank, but has no authority to make things move. In this particular case, we really have to wait and see, because it looks like he will need, for example, the support of the security forces. And the security forces, when you look at them, they are probably reflections of a man called Kabila and his late father, Laurent Desire Kabila, because together they have actually been in power for slightly over 20 years. So it probably means, when you look at the senior officials in the military, intelligence, and what have you, they owe allegiance first and foremost to former President Joseph Kabila. So we can wait and see whether, in fact, they can transfer or shift that loyalty to Felix Tshisekedi. But at least we do know that there is some kind of understanding between the former president and the current president, Felix Tshisekedi. So we have to wait and see.
Shaka, from what we saw, it looked like everything went the way we expected. We saw Kabila physically handing the keys of the state house to his predecessor.
You have to be very, very careful, Paul, because I remember that something of that sort happened in the Republic of Burundi back in 1993 between a Major Pierre Buyoya and an incoming president called Melchior Ndadaye. But guess what? Ndadaye did not last very long. In fact, there were two coups. The first one was a failed one. The second one actually succeeded in killing him and ushering the Republic of Burundi into many, many years of civil war. So let's be honest. We need to be patient. Time, I think, is of great asset. It will demonstrate to us and inform us whether or not what we just saw last week is sustained.
We've seen political transitions happen a lot more in West Africa, for example. We've seen political power changing hands in Ghana. We've seen power changing hands in Nigeria for the first time in 2015. We saw power change from Goodluck Jonathan to the current president, Muhammadu Buhari. When you go across the continent, the numbers keep growing, especially in Southern Africa. But when it comes to East Africa, especially Uganda, Rwanda, we cannot talk about change of power or transition of power. Maybe what does that mean?
Uganda and Rwanda have yet to, in fact, get an opportunity to be able to succeed at doing that. But the good thing, by the way, when you talk about East Africa, we have been able at least to witness some smooth transitions from one individual to another in the United Republic of Tanzania. We have
Kenya
also had the opportunity to witness not once, but actually twice in the Republic of Kenya. So we hope that at some point, Uganda and Rwanda and Burundi will borrow a leaf or a template from their neighbor in Tanzania and Kenya.
Shaka, you've had an opportunity maybe to interact with some of these former heads of state and maybe talk to us. When you talk to these former heads of state, what do they tell you? Is there life after presidency? After having spent so many years in a state house, is there really life living as an ordinary citizen?
As a matter of fact, when you say that and you ask me that sort of question, you sort of make me feel a little bit guilty. And you know why? Because I actually have an entire 1 hour's interview with the former Malawian president, Bakiri Mulusi. I did the interview in August in Blantyre, the commercial capital of Malawi. And I was able to spend a greater part of the day with him. We had a very delicious lunch. We had an incredible, opportunity to compare notes. And he said and assured me that, Shaka, there is no question that I am an example of a symbol that says, yes, indeed, there is life beyond State House. As a matter of fact, he said he was enjoying his time after State House. He was having a great time, and he said he couldn't trade it for anything. In fact, in that particular interview, which we will soon be able to air and broadcast to our audience, he pretty much makes the case to his former colleagues, because he talks about how, for example, when he came to power in 1994, I believe, he found some individuals in power, and when he left power, he still left them there. And when we were talking, he said some of them, in fact, are still in power, including the president of the Republic of Uganda. And so he said he can assure all his former peers and what have you that there is great, great life beyond State House. I also had an opportunity several years ago to be basically what you would say a house guest of a former Kenyan president, Daniel Toroitich arap Moi, in Kabarak, where he has built a university, and he happens to be the chancellor of that particular university. He has also built several very, very, very nice high schools or secondary schools and stuff like that. We were able to spend some time together and what have you. And, you know, he said, I cannot believe that I have had the opportunity to be at the political harem of Kenya. The Kenyans, or the people of Kenya, gave me an opportunity to be at the political harem. I was able to serve and then retire, and I'm enjoying my retirement and still have an opportunity to contribute to the development of the Republic of Kenya. I spent some time also in Ghana several times with a former Ghanaian president. You know, it is, of course, Flight Lieutenant Jerry John Rawlings. He said, after so many years of being at the political harem of Ghana, I am finally in a position where I am really enjoying my time. And again, I continue to have an opportunity to make contribution. He said, you know, Shaka, it's not only the presidency, it's not only in, you know, in Osu Castle that you can actually make contributions. You can make contributions in several other ways. And I have had that opportunity, and I can testify to this to the extent that I appeal and urge to my former peers, my former comrades that I used to interact with, for example, in Addis Ababa during the OAU, you know, summits and the AU summits and stuff like that, that there is life indeed after State House. So I have had the rare opportunity to interact with some of these great men who have done it all, seen it all, and what have you, and they continue to live and enjoy their life.
Let's go to a comment from Fred Ojambo. All Tanzanian former presidents are all enjoying life after presidency, running their personal business. What are these other leaders in East Africa afraid of?
Well, first of all, when you think about the presidents of Tanzania, when you look at the manner in which they came to power, it was very, very different from the way the president of Uganda came to power, because the president of Uganda came to power through an AK-47. He seized power. He was not elected to that office in 1986. He seized it. In other words, he took power by force. When you look at Rwanda, for example, you know that it's beyond simply seizing power. You can also talk about the issue of genocide and all that kind of stuff. So these are two different types of situations. But I think that these presidents have really served. They have been able to make a difference in their societies in different ways. I think they should really have courage. They should have courage so that they can, in fact, negotiate their way out. Because let's face it, whether they like it or not, one day they are going to have to retire, whether it is through their own volition or whether it is going to be through divine intervention. It's going to happen. So I think it would really be even better if they could create conditions that would allow them to be part of what you would call, you know, pomp and pageantry. Just like you saw, especially in Nigeria. You saw the military band and what have you essentially walk you through the transition from Goodluck Jonathan to Major General Muhammadu Buhari, retired, but of course, as you know, certainly not tired.
Shaka, there is another comment here. Let's go to this comment. Shaka, you've lived in America all your life, like all your life in the U.S. Why don't you speak like Americans? You still speak in your African accent. That's a very good question. I think that's maybe why a lot of young people connect with you, especially from other continents.
It's very interesting because, you know, I remember that when I actually first got the opportunity to host Straight Talk Africa, and we're talking about August 2nd, the year 2000. I remember being interviewed and being asked what would it take for me to consider myself a success in terms of hosting Straight Talk Africa. And I remember what came to me naturally, really, was that if I could first and foremost succeed at remaining authentically the Kabale kid, Shaka Sali, the Kabale kid, the kid who was born, grew up in Kabale, southwestern Uganda, breathed the air there, ate the beans and the potatoes of that area, drank the Obushera or Mramba and you name it. If I can remember, I can remain that kid. Because after all, when you're talking about broadcasting, Paul, it is not acting. It is not Hollywood. It is talking about the truth. It is about the issue of integrity. It's about the issue of trust. If you talk about broadcasting, you should be able to see yourself, especially if you have the opportunity to be on television, you should be able to imagine seeing yourself in your audience as being part of those people who are watching you and interacting with you. And you should also think in the terms of the fact that your audience should also perhaps look at itself in the context of actually looking at itself in you. And so that gives you the opportunity to interact and resonate. And so I think that's pretty much what has helped me. And in addition, obviously, I was also very lucky in the sense that I studied a lot of disciplines, including communication. And one thing I got out of it at the end of the day, it was not so much about how you sound, how the accent is and all that kind of stuff, especially in terms of borrowing accents, but rather how you can, in fact, sound authentic and how you can spell and pronounce words with the kind of diction that is very, very easily accessible to your audience, rather than talking at your audience in an elitist way.
Speaking of an elitist way, let's stay on the issue of our transition in Africa. We have another comment. This topic seems to be generating a lot of interest here. We have another comment from Beach Dennis Awi. All Tanzanian presidents were not tyrants like President Museveni and Kagame, who are clinging on to power. Maybe I can add a little bit, of context. Earlier you talked about a former Ghanaian president. Flight Lieutenant Jerry Rawlings did not come in as an elected leader. He overthrew a government to be elected, but he seceded power. You go back to Kabila. Kabila was not elected as a president, but he managed to hand over power. Maybe put that all in context for us.
Well, I mean, we talked about Major General Muhammadu Buhari earlier. People forget that Major General Muhammadu Buhari was, in fact, a military head of state of Nigeria in the 1980s, before he was overthrown by his colleagues, Ibrahim Badamasi, General Ibrahim Badamasi Babangida, and General Sani Abacha. And eventually, he came back to Aso Rock, which is the seat of political power in Nigeria, in Abuja, through elections. And so, yes, in fact, you don't necessarily have to have only come to power through elections in order for you to feel comfortable in terms of making sure that you create conditions that allow you and your country to go through essentially smooth, peaceful transitions of power. But it becomes much, much easier, Paul, especially if you ascend to power through elections. But if you actually shoot your way, in the process, mind you, you step on a lot of people's toes. And in some cases, you are probably even responsible for some people losing their lives and what have you. And so there is this element of fear that what if, just what if someone else does to me what I probably was able to do to others. But of course, there are so many ways through which you can go around, through consultation, through coming up with very good policies, policies that reflect social, economic, political justice for everybody.
Shaka, some of your critics say that you are always criticizing leaders who have overstayed their welcome, especially in the Ugandan context, Rwanda. Let's go to a comment here. It's a personal one, a personal plea from Amanya Julius. What is your take on the Ugandan politics come 2021, and would you consider running in that election as a candidate for president?
First of all, Julius, I have to say frankly that I am profoundly flattered and also profoundly humbled, obviously, for what appears to be your compliments and support, what appears to be your degree or sense or of confidence that seems to be reflected in that sort of question or remark or statement. But I have to be very honest with you that as of now, I feel very, very, very comfortable doing the thing that I often do and I love to do, which is getting an opportunity to be an advocate of social, economic, political justice for all of us. And when you talk about 2021,
correct,
it is a very long way from today. If I wanted to do that, first of all, frankly, I would have to make a lot of consultations and stuff like that. I would also have to think about whether or not I have fire in the belly, whether I would want to do that sort of sacrifice, because for me, I think it would actually be a sacrifice. It would be willing and ready to sacrifice, and not simply talking the talk, just like I have heard others talk about how they and their families are sacrificing. I would simply have to be in a situation where I can indeed walk the talk so that I can deliver, so that I can put smiles on a lot of people's faces and all that kind of stuff, so that I can indeed feel that I am a servant leader. I would want to be a servant leader if, in fact, at some point, I chose to play that kind of role. And let's face it, I would also want to, if I wanted to be a presidential candidate, sincerely, I would want to compete in an environment that was socially, politically, economically embracing, meaning you'd have to have the playing field that would enable what you would call civil competition, a competition where people can compete in a context that is, in a way, does not favor any particular individual. Because the way it looks like right now, you would simply be accompanying a specific individual. First of all, especially when you talk about Uganda, we know that the Ugandan President Yoweri Museveni has actually said that as far as he's concerned, really, he is the only person, the only individual who has the vision thing. He's the only one who knows where Uganda is going and where Uganda should go, that the rest of you, the rest of us, should be prepared and ready to be implementers. No, I would want to be in a situation where when you are competing for elections, you are competing, all of you, with your hands free. You are competing, all of you, when in fact your message can be accessed by the people that at the end of the day have the right to choose who their leaders is. And I would want to compete in an environment where There is an electoral commission that is in fact going to be counting votes and giving the results that reflect the will of the people, but not the will of the individuals who count the votes.
Just real quickly, how about leaders, the critics who have said, for example, President Museveni has said he's a servant leader, that he's there because the people have asked him to be there, and he has won elections to boot?
You know, first of all, it is very easy to talk the talk, but it's quite another thing, frankly, to walk that talk. If you look at what has been going on, we know, for example, that even the Supreme Court, the Ugandan Supreme Court itself, has actually weighed in several times. The Supreme Court has weighed in several times to the extent that, in fact, there was a time when the judges were, in fact, supposed to annul the election. One of the individuals that cast the vote of annulling the election, a Professor George Kanyihamba, for example, happens to be a friend of mine, and we talk a lot, and we've compared the notes and stuff like that. And he told me that his colleague, who is unfortunately not with us anymore, Joseph Mulenga, was supposed, in fact, to vote along with those people who wanted to annul the election. But unfortunately, he somehow caved in because the powers that be were able to access him with some inducements. And so the Supreme Court itself in Uganda, when you read its reports, you can clearly see that that election has an asterisk. That election has a question mark. If you look at the comments, you look at the reports written by the electoral monitors, observers, and what have you, you'll also get the evidence that is incontrovertible to such an extent that you cannot really, think in terms of taking President Yoweri Museveni's word to your bank account. Because when it comes to the issue of trust, I think there is a trust deficit in as far as President Yoweri Museveni is concerned.
Shaka, what are you talking about tomorrow on Straight of Africa?
We're going to be talking about the challenges facing women in leadership in Africa. And there are so many. And you know what? We really need to have leaders who are true reflections of society, true reflections of our families. Just like in your family, you have a mother, you have a father, you have sisters, you have aunts, you have grandfathers, you have grandmothers, that kind of stuff. Women can do incredible jobs beyond simply expected to be in kitchens.
Very briefly, can women, what role can women play in the African political arena?
Of course, they can play as almost any role that you and I can play. They can play any role that a man can play. They have the intellect. Why do you go with them to school? You go with them to school, whether it's high school, universities, and what have you, and they beat you. So if you can beat you at a university, why can't they be presidents of Uganda? Why can't they be presidents of Ghana? They can do it.
Thank you so much again for watching Shaka Extra Time. Shaka, thank you. I look forward to hosting you on another edition of Shaka Extra Time. Until then, so long from Washington.
Thank you.